Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer afternoon slash early evening briefing at this point. Sorry we're a wee bit later than planned, folks. It's been a very busy day at Hibs Observer Towers. All sorts going on. You may be aware of one or two things happening at the club this week. If not, I'm sure we'll be able to enlighten you over the next God knows how long. Joined, as always, by Patrick McPartlin to get stuck into a number of Hibs related topics. But first, I'm just going to give a word for our sponsors. We're thrilled to have Weissman, a global leader in the boiler industry, known for their top notch German engineering, sponsor our podcast. They've teamed up with Scotland's very own award winning installation team, MPH Boilers, making this a perfect match right here in Scotland. Weissman's boilers are engineered to deliver not just warmth, but unparalleled efficiency and reliability. It's cutting-edge technology designed to save you on your energy bills and reduce emissions as well. With MPH Boilers, you know you're getting service from the best in the business. It's a local team committed to excellence and, of course, customer satisfaction. So when you choose a Weissman boiler installed by MPH Boilers, you'll get a free internet controller. Plus, they're also offering you the first year's service free. It's all about giving you peace of mind and just making sure that you're looked after. So if your boiler's showing its age or you're simply considering an upgrade, this is your chance to get world-class engineering with local expert service. Weissman and MPH Boilers, it's a match made in Scotland. So make sure to check them out and take the first steps towards a warmer, more efficient home. Okay, where do we start, Patrick? I think let's go to last night. Look, there's been an awful lot of negativity on these videos and around these parts in general of late. So we'll maybe indulge ourselves, our own souls, a wee bit, just with something a bit warmer. So last night, farewell at Easter Road for Lewis Stevenson and Paul Hanlon. In the end, it was probably everything that you probably could have hoped it would be. Both players starting and playing the majority of the game in a 3-0 Hibs victory and then being brought off to standing ovations, coming back out afterwards for a lap of honour. Soundtracked, of course, by Sunshine on Leith, the whole Hibs team there, their families there, thousands hung around to see it, and I think there was barely a dry eye in the house by the end, Patrick, wasn't there?
I think that's a fair comment. Yeah, it was. I think given everything that's gone on in the past, it's not actually that long, is it? It's only a few days, but it feels a bit like a lifetime with everything that's happened. But just I think the one thing that everyone at the club would be wanting this week was for two sort of stalwarts, icons, legends, you name it, to be given a proper send-off. And I think if you were trying to script it, it probably couldn't have gone any better. They both play their part in a clean sheet. They both play 90 minutes. They're both involved in a goal as well, which I thought was a nice little sort of addition. I mean, I'm not even sure either of that got that in their testimonials. So it's just, I think, a really nice way to bring the curtain down on what's been kind of quite sparkling careers at Hibs for both of them. Obviously not always the the best of times, but I think both of them would probably say the sort of the good times have far outweighed the bad in terms of how good they've been. So I think very very much felt like kind of end of an era sort of stuff. And I think Sunshine on Leith, when it's been sort of sung by a busy stadium, and especially when you've got two legends walking around the pitch, it was sort of like it was emotional. And there were certainly a few TBI fans around us that I could see, which I think is hardly surprising. But just I suppose a kind of fitting tribute to what the two of them have given to the club on and off the pitch over the years.
Yeah, Patrick just about held himself together, folks, I'm sure. I don't know how he was when he got home, but during the game he certainly held himself together. But no, I mean, it was emotional. I mean, I think I kind of touched on this when we were talking about them leaving. Like I've not covered Hibs for anything like the length of time that yourself and others have, but I still, obviously, being a follower, Scottish football, you know who all about Paul Hanlon, Lewis Stevenson, what they mean to Hibs, but sort of you still got this kind of sense of just what a big occasion that was last night at Easter Road, and it was good in the end to see them get a good turnout. I think Lewis Stevenson said in typical fashion, and I think it was in his Hibs TV interview, he might have said something along the lines of he was worried that nobody was going to turn up. I mean, I don't. As bad as things have been recently, I don't think either him or Hanlon had to worry about that at all. But just to kind of echo what you said, it was a great occasion for them. Hanlon almost getting on the score sheet. I don't know who that was that cleared it off the line, but there'll probably be a villain at Easter Road for till the end of time now. Whoever you were, I can't quite remember who it was. There was a moment as well when Hibs were awarded the penalty, and I'm pretty sure it was Joe Newell. Tried to give Lewis Stevenson the ball, and I can't emphasise the speed with which he just turned around and punted it away, because he obviously wasn't having any of that. But again,
I don't recall him taking a single penalty in his life for him, so
no,
it's probably a good decision.
Aye, perhaps so. Again, it's just it was a funny wee moment. But again, it's the mark of the man, really, isn't it? It's he's one of those where the sort of name on the back of the shirt has never been more important than the badge on the front of it, obviously. So it's kind of even then it was. Even though it was his chance for a moment in the limelight on what was already his big night, he was kind of looking out for the good of the team, and it was probably a good idea to give it to Mizian Malida in the end. Just before we move on, the game itself, I mean, I think the fans at Easter Road needed a wee bit like that. It was probably a wee bit cathartic for them. After the sort of misery of the past couple of weeks, obviously losing up at Ross County, getting a battering off Aberdeen, Nick Montgomery being sacked. It was a good Hibs performance. There was a wee bit of vibrancy about it. It's clear by this point that David Gray knows how to get a bit of a bounce out of a Hibs team in these situations. But it was a pretty, as far as end of season, even taking away the context of Hanlon and Stevenson, as far as end of season games go, it was a pretty enjoyable one, I think.
It was, yeah. I think it's not a stretch to say it's probably Hibs' best performance in a number of months. And what was particularly noticeable, and I know you're always going to get this when there's a change in managers. You see it all the time. Doesn't matter who's come in, whether it's a new permanent head coach, whether it's an interim head coach like Dave Gray or what. But I just felt that the players were playing a little bit like the shackles were off. I mean, Martin Boyle, I thought, looked back to, if not his best, at least sort of fairly close to it. Did well to get the first goal. The second goal is sort of vintage Boiler as well. Dylan Venti, I think, hasn't had the best of times recently, but I thought he looked a bit more kind of lively last night. Not playing a different position, it was still the 4-2-3-1, and he was being used as the sort of the focal point, the number 9. But even just like little changes here and there. Nectar Trianta's coming in from his first start in a while, and I thought he looked like he hadn't been away. But Josh Campbell got around the pitch really well. Played. I think he's the kind of player who I think you're always going to get like 100% effort from him, and sometimes it doesn't come off. But when it does, he does actually look like a really good part of the team. He's got that energy. He's got that desire. He's got that bit of fight about him as well, and obviously he's a Hibs fan, which helps. And I think Hibs probably did miss having him as an option during the time he was sidelined. From the sort of the end of December until fairly recently, and I think it was noticeable. You could feel a bit of a lift, and whether that's the Dave Gray effect, whether it's just a bit of the pressure being taken off. Who knows? But it was an enjoyable game to watch. I didn't think there was an awful lot different, to be honest, from the overall performance to the first sort of 25-30 minutes on Sunday.
No.
But what was noticeable was that Hibs kept going. Like the first goal came, what was it, just sort of 5 minutes before half time, I think. Mm-hmm. Closely followed by the second. But they'd had chances. Like Boyle had that effort that was deflected onto the post and out for a corner. You had other efforts that were sort of, not too far away, maybe wide, saved, whatever. But there wasn't that sort of same sort of feeling of kind of, resignment, like, oh, well, we haven't scored, so, that's it. The other team's going to go up the other end and score. And I think, the defence does, it's taken a bit of a battering in more ways than one this season, and rightly so at times. But, I thought all 4 defenders played, really well last night. Stevenson and Hanlon, we've discussed. Chris Cadden, really good at right back, and Rocky Bashiri back on his maybe favoured right side. I thought played Theo Bear really well. This is probably the most informed striker in the Scottish Premiership at the moment, and he didn't really get an awful lot of joy out of Rocky last night, which is nice I think for Rocky, because obviously obviously responsible for the first goal against Ross County. He didn't have a great time of it on Sunday against Aberdeen, but I think you look across the park and there was just, players just seemed happier. It seemed like there was more of a kind of, I don't know, a bit of a bounce in their step, a bit of a spring in their step, and that's something that's been missing from Hibs for a long time. And I just think Motherwell couldn't really cope with that. It would have been the same if Nick Montgomery was still in charge. I've got my doubts. But as Dave Gray said afterwards, first and foremost, it was about getting a reaction to Sunday's performance, which they got, and there was that sort of like added incentive of giving Paul and Lewis the proper send off.
Mm-hmm.
So from that point of view, every box was ticked. But interesting as well, though, that Gray's also saying, the performance and the result doesn't change anything. Doesn't fix the season. It's still been, it's still been like a poor season. It's still been a season of underachievement, and I think it's just the kind of guy he is. That it's obviously a good performance. He's masterminded, if you like, this reaction to the absolute horror show that was Sunday. But at the same time, he's saying basically, this is the bare minimum. This is what we should be doing. And I think that's something that Hibs fans probably haven't heard too much of recently.
Yeah, I think he was spot on with that, wasn't he? He's not kind of
Yeah.
sugarcoating it that just one night puts a completely different complexion on the entire season, because it has been kind of so generally quite poor. And he was spot on. Just before we go though, obviously, I mean, there has been a wee bit of kind of debate, obviously, around. I think it's just with the fact that Hibs could be going into the start of next season with just one senior contracted centre back, and Rocky Bashiri. So I mean, I feel like I know where I would stand on this, but do you think it's the right decision to let Paul Hanlon go?
Oh, hit me with the tough ones today. I see. Great, thank you.
Is he worth another year?
Heart says yes. I'm not sure the head does, and that's not from. It's a difficult one because I think basically this has been coming for so long that for both Paul and Lewis. I mean, it's like the worst kept secret in Scottish football that they weren't going to get new deals. I think. And whether that's whether that was right, there was sort of right or wrong decision by the club is up for debate. And there's obviously this big sort of question now is like, well, will the new manager maybe think differently? Will they then turn around and offer, offer one or both of them and a sort of like a contract extension? A bit difficult to do after last night, and then have to do it all over again in sort of like 12 months or 2 years time. But I think like especially, I mean, Stevenson's sort of always been very kind of, I think he's always sort of felt like each year is going to be his last year. And so I think, he would probably feel like, at the age he is, with the fact that Abita's been, the sort of first choice left back for the bulk of the season, I think he probably feels like probably ready for it. With Paul, he's obviously a little bit younger. He's not played as much this season. He's certainly, I thought, he's looked decent when he has played. I don't, it's not that there's been such a sort of drop off in his performances that you'd say, well, you know what, maybe it is time to move on. But I think he himself is probably sort of like come to terms with it by now. I mean, I don't think that stops the disappointment. I mean, he's spoken about that. Spoken about saying that he thought he'd basically see his career out here because this is his club. But I also wonder whether he just thinks, is it best to sort of leave at this point rather than sort of sticking around for another season of, am I going to play? Is the new manager going to, if he was going to stay, is the new manager going to fancy me throughout the whole season? It's just really difficult. So I think, I mean, obviously it's probably a good job I'm not making the sort of big football decisions at Hibs, but I think that for me, the big thing is you've got a summer of change like Hibs have got coming. And, we've talked about this before. It was going to be a big summer of change anyway. Now it's an even bigger summer of change, or it's a summer of more change. With obviously a sporting director coming in, new manager, head coach, being appointed, and, probably a lot of change in terms of the playing squad. And I think somebody like Paul Hanlon, who gets the club, who's been there, done it, 2 or 3 times in some cases, it would just be, the perfect person to have around to sort of help sort of, blood the new people, whether that's from the academy, whether it's from out with the club. Somebody like him has that sort of leadership quality in the dressing room and can tell people what it means to play for Hibs, to wear the shirt, what's expected. And that's my sort of main kind of thing about this, is that I think if you were going to offer him a new deal, then that's where it makes sense. I mean, he's obviously not the player he was sort of 4 or 5 years ago. Like he's had injuries, age catches up with everyone. He's maybe not a starting centre back for 30 to 40 games a season, but I think he would still have something to contribute to Hibs, absolutely. But like I say, I think psychologically he's probably kind of moved on already, and I think it'd be very difficult to, regardless of last night, I think it'd be very difficult to kind of come back from that. But you never know. Football's a funny old game, and
as they say,
it's I mean, I don't think it'd be the worst thing in the world if they turned around and said, actually, we do want to keep you on.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think he's got a lot to offer, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch as well. You look at the Hanlon Stevenson programme that was produced for the game last night, which I think if you haven't seen it, do try and get hold of a copy of it, because there's some fantastic stuff in there. Don't read it in public, because you will get very teary and emotional, especially when you read the letters from their kids. But I'm not going to spoil any of it. But it's a really sort of well-produced piece of work, and a lot of credit to those involved. But you can see Paul sort of saying that he sort of feels, I think he's writing like somebody who's sort of coming to terms with it. But you see what the likes of Ryan Porteous are saying, and it's pretty much what I've just been saying over this sort of past 5 minutes, which is just that he's so much more than just a defender. He's a Hibs fan. He's an icon. He's got so much to offer in terms of advice for the younger players. So I feel like I've kind of taught myself into saying yes, absolutely, you should get off the new deal. And that's not what I said at the start, but
yeah, you've flipped yourself around there. Well, basically, the latter half of the second version of Patrick in that section there, who talked himself around to perhaps thinking it was a good idea. You've sort of nailed the reasons why I think it would. I don't think a 1 year deal for Paul Hanlon would do any harm whatsoever. There was already going to be a summer of change, as you said, and as you also said, it's now going to be a summer of even bigger change. They're going to have to recruit at least a few centre backs. I think to have Paul Hanlon still around, I mean, he's not suggesting for one moment that he's going to be playing every week, but the fact that he's hardly played, this season, but he's still come out and said, I didn't want to leave. So it says to me that he's not going to get completely, disillusioned with a bit part role. He probably accepts that that's maybe where he is in his career now, and he's obviously got that much of an affinity with Hibs that he would probably he would stay in most. It would take a lot for him to turn around and say, actually, I want to leave this club. I don't want to be here anymore. So I think for those reasons, it certainly seems to me as though he'd be one worth keeping around for another year. And this is not, to completely just gloss over, Lewis Stevenson in this debate as well, but it was more so because Lewis came out and basically said himself, I think it's the right time for me to go. He's like, he said in his pre-match before the Aberdeen game, he's like, I think it's a good time. And obviously there was an agreement between him and the club on that. And just with Hanlon, there was obviously that the disappointment was that much more tangible with Paul. I think you could see that he was maybe still not as far along the road as Lewis was in coming to terms with it. So I mean, as you say, you never know in football, but he did say in his pre-match before Motherwell that as much as he didn't want to leave, he says he can't actually envisage it changing now. So I mean, we might just be debating a completely moot point here, but I do think he would have been worth just keeping him around for another year for just the experience, the player that he is.
Did he keep one without the other though?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, they do come as a package deal, don't they? So it's, I know. Imagine they end up they went and signed for the same club because it's like a, I don't know, like an ant-and-deck contract clause where they can only work together. They can't have one
Just
without the other.
Handler and Stevenson have been called many things over the years, but I think linking them to Ant and Deck is a step too far.
Well, it's famous double acts, isn't it? It's the principle of this completely imaginary contract
We'll go
clause.
with the two Hibs, like the two
Yeah,
Ronnies.
the two
Let's go
Highbees
with
over the two Ronnies. Yeah. So, I mean, we could debate that one all day. I could probably talk myself into the opposite viewpoint if I went on long enough. So, we'll leave it at that. Do let us know in the comments. We've got Andrew McBrearty in the comments saying, Paul is an example of what you want to retain around a playing squad for all of the reasons that you note, Patrick, especially with the overhaul that is coming. So, yeah, basically, just as we've been saying there, is there that kind of argument to just keep that just not valuable, priceless experience around for a wee bit longer. But do let us know if you agree or disagree. So moving on from last night, because we're 20 minutes in already and we haven't touched on any of just any number of things that have happened at Hibs this week.
what day is it?
I don't know. They're all rolling into one at this point. So yeah, obviously the big story is how Hibs no longer have a permanent manager. Nick Montgomery was, as the statement put it, relieved of his duties. There was no, by mutual agreement or anything like that. No, the manager was relieved of his duties. No, Nick Montgomery no longer the Hibs manager as of Tuesday morning there, and I think, regardless of whether what side of the fence you were on with, did Montgomery deserve more time? Should he have got more time? Is this long enough to judge? I think that the reality was that I think fan opinion had turned so far against him at that juncture that it becomes inevitable at that point. There was probably not going to be any other outcome. And I think there was a lot of chat at the game afterwards. On Sunday, there was a real kind of, can Montgomery survive this? And it's obviously transpired that he hasn't. Do you feel, I might be just asking an obvious question here, Patrick, but do you feel it was the right decision to part ways?
Yeah, I think so because, I mean, realistically, for a club like Hibs, like not nobody has a divine right to beat anybody else in the Scottish Premiership. But when you're the manager of a Hibs team that loses that heavily to Aberdeen in that manner, and let's forget this is not an Aberdeen team that has been swashbuckling and fighting for Europe all season. This is an Aberdeen team that has been, a bit well. It's been a difficult season at Pittodrie. I mean, you'd say possibly more so than at Easter Road in terms of having Barry Robson in and then sort of sacking him, bringing in Neil Warnock for however long that was, and then having to make a change again. And this is a team like Hibs who had nothing to play for, but played as though their lives depended on it. And so I think that even if you're just using Sunday as your example, then yeah, absolutely. Because what we saw on Sunday, I think, were players that either couldn't or wouldn't play for the coaching staff, or just they weren't being used properly. Their abilities weren't being harnessed correctly. Call it what you will, but I just felt that that it was like a turning point. It really was the nadir of his tenure, and I think last night probably kind of backs up that it was the right decision. I don't think it would have been an easy one for the board. I spoke to Malcolm McPherson earlier this week. Somehow managed to fit that in around everything else that's gone on. And that's, you can read that exclusive interview on the Hibs Observer website right now. In fact, it's live, it's up there, and there's a lot of good stuff in there about Nick Montgomery, about Ben Kinsell, which I'm sure we'll talk about shortly, and the hiring of Malcolm Mackay as well. But I felt it was interesting that Malcolm was saying that basically the board had such high hopes for the appointment. And he was saying he felt that the fans thought it was a good move at the time. The club's investors thought it was a good move at the time as well because of his success in Australia. And it just basically, like, after they failed to make the top six, they put out the statement, and there was obviously the suggestion that results have to improve, otherwise you're toast. albeit didn't say it in so many words. And I think, aside from the result against St Johnstone, you then had the game against Ross County, you then had Aberdeen. There wasn't really any sign there that there was going to be the uplift they were looking for. And I think it's it would have been like a reluctant decision, I think, but one that they felt they had to make, even with the thought of like a summer transfer window, because you think if you can't get much out of this current crop of players, and it is a good squad. We saw that last night. We've seen it earlier on in the season. We've seen it under a previous manager, dare I say it, in the games against Luzerne. That these are good individual players. They're good collectively. I know there's been injuries, there's been international duty. VAR's not been a friend to Hibs this season, but the difference between Sunday and last night was kind of, it was chalk and cheese, basically. And I just think, from point of view of taking the club forward, it was just, I feel that it would have been really difficult to, I think it would have been really difficult to sort of justify keeping him on. And, I mean, sometimes these things just don't, they just don't work out. Like, you can get a manager in who's got very little experience of, managing sort of senior teams. Thinking back to when Hibs appointed Tony Mowbray, to when they appointed Alan Stubbs, and these guys just flew. Like, it just went really well. And, you could say that's down to the team they've got around them. You could say it's down to the players they had, but it's not always going to work out. It's not always going to work the way you want it to. And I think that possibly the biggest issue, and I've said this probably in previous videos, I've maybe said it in pieces I've written. I'm losing track of what we've done and what we haven't done, to be quite honest. It's been that sort of week. But I think, for me, the biggest thing was that, there were no statement wins. Montgomery didn't have any statement wins. That was the big sort of concern. Barely laid a glove on Celtic Rangers, couple of draws against Hearts, but, you really want to be, getting at least one or two derby wins in there if you can. And arguably the best performance and result of the season came under Lee Johnson, and Nick Montgomery is supposed to be a better option than Johnson. But what you've ended up with is a team that was playing attacking football under the previous manager, and sometimes it was interesting. It was kind of overload the final third and hope for the best with everything else. And I just, it just didn't happen like that under Montgomery. And I just think, there's no doubt that he worked hard on it. Given the sort of hours he was spending at HTC, obviously, really dedicated and trying to turn things around, but it just wasn't happening. And I just think, the biggest fear for the board must have been keeping him in place, sort of stuttering on to the end of the season, having a summer transfer window where you're maybe only bringing in certain types of players, and then you're ending up with exactly the same situation you ended up with this season, where you get 3 games in, you haven't had the results and performances you want, so you have to get rid of another manager. And it's again, this is something McPherson said, it's something everyone has said around the club. You can't just keep on bringing in a new manager every single year. Like, that's not how, it's not a good recipe for success. It's obviously not good for stability. There isn't any stability, because then you end up with, every time you change the manager, something else changes, whether it's the style of play, whether it's the style of training, whether it's, you name it. And, the biggest issue at the moment for Hibs is that they just cannot build up a head of steam. They cannot make progress. They cannot build anything. And that's why, you're looking at a second bottom 6 finish in 3 seasons. That's why you're looking at no statement wins. And, I just think with, the League Cup group stages on the way, and a chance to kind of start next season strongly with, a kind of freshened up squad with the right sort of manager. You've got Malky Mackay in place. This is somebody who's got contacts, throughout football, and the hope will be that he can sort of help influence the search for a head coach who can do what they've wanted all the previous head coaches to do, but actually make it happen. So I think it kind of become inevitable. I would have been very, very surprised if, any manager had presided over a 4-0 home defeat by Aberdeen and kept their job, really. I mean, there is a lot of argument to say, well, if he'd had a summer transfer window and brought in his own players, things could have been different. But it's a big risk,
Yeah,
and
I
you
think
just you can't be sure of that, and I think that's
aye.
probably what forced the board's hand.
Yeah, I don't doubt Montgomery. As he said, he signed on for a long-term thing. He said he had sort of reservations about coming for the fact that Hibs have gone through so many managers recently. But I think any promise of time and patience to build a project, I think it has to come with some sort of real sort of tangible signs of progress within
Yes,
that, whilst accepting that there are going to be bumps in the road, there's going to be bad days, but going to be maybe several bad days. And I think we we maybe looked for the positives in Montgomery's work more than well, quite a lot. I think we kind of tried to take the positives out of certain performances, but and certain
ever the eternal
results.
optimist.
Yeah, just to try and spark some sort of positivity. But I think when you look back, there was very little for fans to sort of hang their hat on and be like, right, okay, we've said, even if they'd missed out in the top six, see if there was maybe 4 or 5 games or 4, 5, 6 performances where they could go, right, this is what the manager's trying to do. This is what we could be. If he can do this with the current crop, maybe what can he do with 6, 7, 8 of his own summer signings? Obviously, he brought in you sign guys like Malida. That's kind of suggestion that maybe he's got an eye for a player that he can bring in. He can convince quality to come to the club, but I just don't think there was enough of it, and you ended up in a sort of situation where the goodwill had been completely exhausted almost. You're going into the summer needing this huge rebuild. You've got the the League Cup groups coming up, and by the end I kept envisaging this scenario where Hibs go up to Annan or somewhere on a Tuesday night with
Up to Annan?
Sorry, well, we're down to Annan. So.
Down to Annan, yeah, come on.
Aye, sorry, geography's terrible.
Hibs Observer providing a service since
Yeah,
2023.
Oh God, just ignore me. Well, my point is, or was, sorry, before I got that so geographically horribly wrong, is you could see Hibs going to a lower league ground, whether it's up the
North
country
or
or
south.
down the country, whatever direction you folks want, whatever way you want to go, but going to this, into one of these games with a squad of, 20 guys, 10 of them have only met each other a few days previously, and what happens if you get beat 3-1 or somewhere, and then suddenly they give time to the additional time to a project that was already running low on goodwill becomes a complete emergency, a complete crisis, and the league season hasn't even kicked off yet. So I think you probably, in the end, couldn't take that risk. Kind of liked Montgomery. Thought he was I don't mean, people always say things like this when the manager gets sacked, and I don't mean it to sound, like patronising, but you could tell he was a genuinely decent guy. He wasn't. I know people got a bit fed up with his interviews and maybe going for a lot of the same go-to lines in the end. But he was always quite courteous and good with his time, and you could tell that he was really all in on it. On a personal level, it is a shame that 3 guys have come all the way over from Australia, uprooted families for this huge opportunity, and it's not worked. But yeah, basically, point, like, I do agree with you. I mean, it just got to the point where it felt like it couldn't continue. So here we are, dealing with the fallout of it. The fallout of which your interview with Mark McPherson goes into in quite real kind of minute detail, going over the kind of the various aspects. Obviously, I'll just maybe take them in order. Just bring your interview up there. It is well worth a look, folks. As Patrick said, it's live on the Hibs Observer website just now. Chairman Malcolm McPherson talking about Nick Montgomery. Also talking about Ben Kensel, Chief Executive. Obviously, when another manager gets sacked, it's generally the Chief Executive who takes the brunt of the flak for that. But I know, as you'd probably expect, Malcolm McPherson has come out and he's he's defending. He's getting behind Ben Kensel in the face of some really sustained criticism, and he's basically, from what I gather, Patrick, he's pointing out that the underperformance on the park can't be pinned on any one person, and that it's a collective failure. I'll probably just let you take it from there. What was your impressions of how the chairman views Ben Kensel's kind of role in recent events?
I think he was very sort of quick to point out that any failures in recent seasons have been collective, and I think presumably includes himself in that, and the rest of the board for possibly making bad decisions at the wrong times. Not really sure you can make a bad decision at a good time, but you know what I mean, or the right time.
Particularly bad times, though.
Yes, exactly. Forgive me, I have not had much sleep this week, so there's even more rambling and waffling than usual.
At least you know where Annan is, though. I mean,
there is that.
You've not plumbed that depth yet.
No, that's my silver lining here. But no, I mean, it was very sort of clear that there's almost like feels like things have kind of gone in a bit of a different direction. That I mean, you look at Ben Kinsell and you look at someone there who is, I think, trying very hard to engage with the fan base. I think that's been what he did at Norwich when he was chief operating officer. He's tried to continue that up here. You see him sort of getting involved with the sort of marches to Tynecastle with Block 7. You can sort of see him out with the fans in Switzerland doing the Europa Conference League games. And whether you think that's a good idea or not, I think it's coming from the right sort of place, not necessarily always hitting the right notes. And I think I think when you look at a lot of the stuff that's gone on at the club in recent seasons, and it's not been great. Nobody comes out of it looking particularly good, and that seems to be the sort of collective kind of belief at the moment that there I think there has been a lot of soul searching and just a bit of, I mean, Malcolm McPherson did look quite a kind of broken man, to be honest, when he was talking about however many managers it's been in whatever sort of length of time, 4 managers since the Gordons have come in, and I think there's a realization or a recognition, sorry, that it can't continue, that they need to change the structure so that the right people are in the right positions. And I think that Kinsell's obviously been doing a heck of a lot of stuff on the commercial side of things. He's been involved to some extent on the footballing side of things, but I don't think anyone's really been 100% sure on what exactly it is he's been doing. So Malcolm went to great pains to sort of say he's sort of kicked off the agreement or the partnership with the Black Knights and Bill Foley, if you like. He said that was down to him, and he was sort of really talking up his what he's done off the pitch and like his his commercial nous and everything that he's done to sort of try and improve the club's sort of turnover. And I think the suggestion was that the board backs him because he's got that sort of credit in the bank, but at the same time recognizing that the footballing side of things has been it's not been great. It's been he didn't say it'd been a failure. He said obviously mistakes had been made. He said that they had to get it right, and obviously Malcolm's a Hibs fan. He gets it. He knows how the fans feel, and he he did say, you'll see this in the piece, he's saying if he wasn't on the inside, he'd be outside with the rest of the fans saying exactly the same things about exactly the same people. So, I think if there's been one sort of criticism possibly of the club over the past few years, it's that there maybe haven't been enough people in key positions who really get the club. I'm not saying that, the whole club has to be Hibs fans from top to bottom. But it goes back to Hanlon and Stevenson, and it's just the importance of having people who get the club, who know what it means to so many people. And I just think maybe they haven't had enough people like that recently. And I think that's something that they may be trying to change. I think obviously with Malcolm being in his role, you've got somebody in a pretty powerful position there who has been a fan of the club for many years, and by his own admission knows how the fans are feeling and wants the club to be successful, same as everybody else. And he also is aware that fans do not really care much for the commercial side of things if
Mm-hmm.
it's not going well on the pitch. And I think he gets that. I think he respects that the fact that that's not been the case for far too long. I mean, since Jack Ross got Hibs to third in the sort of COVID season, as we're calling it, it's just been sort of underachieving since then. And I think Lee Johnson getting the side to fifth in Europe, probably as good as it's been since then. And it's obviously not good enough. And I think that he seems very, very sort of sure, very optimistic that bringing Malky Mackay in will sort of help just kind of refocus efforts on the pitch. It means that Kinsella can concentrate more on the commercial side of things, and you've got somebody with a good background in football, in terms of management, in terms of his role at the SFA, with a big contacts book that I think could be very useful in terms of trying to identify the next head coach, trying to identify where Hibs can improve, in terms of recruitment, in terms of the academy, pretty much everything on the footballing side of things. I think I asked him as well about the Mackay's background. Obviously, the appointment did bring with it a lot of opposition from certain Hibs fans or supporters groups. We saw Hibernian Pride and Block 7, as well as the Hibernian Women's Supporters Alliance, all issuing statements sort of in opposition to the appointment. And I think what Malcolm was saying was quite interesting. I'm not going to go through all of it because it's an article for a reason. I think it's good to read the whole thing. But there was a sort of recognition that there was a bit of controversy behind the appointment. He was aware of the reaction. I think he expected it, but he's also laid out his reasons, why they've made the appointment, both in a footballing sense and in a non-footballing sense. And I think it's good for somebody from the sort of from a position of authority at the club, from the club's board, from the club hierarchy, to explain that, and this early on, because obviously I know Malky's done Hibs TV, but it's not really the sort of thing that you can sort of do one interview about it and then just kind of brush it under the carpet. So I think interesting to hear the viewpoint from the board, because obviously, I mean, you don't have to look very far to see how much of a sort of divisive appointment this has been, for the fan base. And I think that's, I think McPherson is hopeful that Mackay will be, sort of so good for the club in terms of a footballing side of things that, that's what the focus will turn on. Like, he's not, I don't think he's saying it should be forgotten. I don't think he's saying it should be overlooked. But I think he's hopeful that they've finally got the man in who might get the club back to where they want it to be on the pitch. And ultimately, I think that's what you want the focus to be on for the club as a whole, is just are we getting it right on the pitch? Because ultimately, that's what 15,000-16,000 fans every second Saturday are wanting to see.
Yeah, aye, I know. As you said, it's. I mean, it came out. I mean, I think there was a kind of suggestion that there was something in the offing. I think Malky Mackay had been at a few games over the past couple of weeks. He was seen in the director's box. And then, but obviously, I don't think anybody quite expected it to be announced on the same day as Nick Montgomery being sacked. And as you said, it has been divisive. Obviously, Malky Mackay, he comes with a certain degree of baggage, and did it surprise you in that sense that that when the announcement came and when the sort of decision to go down this road, because as you said that the club have acknowledged that it was going to be divisive, and for me there was maybe the question I've seen some fans ask is this type of appointment at a time where the club could maybe be doing with a bit more unity. Is it kind of a case of that Malcolm felt that Malky's value as in a football sense will sort of win people round? Because obviously people have been, I've seen a kind of range of reactions, but some of them are in the sort of more angry, thinking about handing the season book back type reactions. It's got quite sort of really kind of emotional in that sense. So it is kind of, to me, it struck me as a sort of a potentially divisive move at a time when a bit of unity was needed. But as I said, the sort of feeling that what Malky Mackay can bring in a football sense will win people over. It was just, I'm kind of not 100% sure on the sort of rationale.
Yeah, I think that's what it. I think that's what it is. That's what they're hoping. I think they're hoping that there's a recognition that they need to turn things around on the pitch. There's a recognition that certain aspects of the club haven't been performing the way they should have been in recent years. I just think about recruitment, think about the pathway of youngsters into the first team, and I think they're just hoping that Malky Mackay, with his experience of that, can essentially try and get the club back into a place where on field is going as well as off field, because as McPherson was saying, fans don't really care about that. They care about the result at 10-5 on a Saturday. And I think that he was pointing out that Mackay had sort of come to them with a very sort of detailed kind of dossier, if you like, on what he was going to improve at Hibs, how he would take things forward. And yeah, I think Hibs have tried so many things recently that just haven't worked. I can see Gavin Miller in the comments there asking what job Brian McDermott will be doing if Mackay is doing the sort of head of football stuff. Brian McDermott will be sort of moving to a sort of purely recruitment-based role. Not 100% what that's going to entail, but he does have plenty of experience scouting players, which is what he was doing before he came to Hibs. So that's what Brian McDermott will be doing. He'll be sort of focusing on scouting and just sort of basically assisting in that sort of recruitment role, which will obviously free Mackay up to focus on kind of an overall football or sporting director role. But yeah, I think there's really a hope that what Mackay can do with the club on the pitch, or the team on the pitch, is we'll sort of bring the focus onto. I'm really not saying this very well. Let's try that again. I think that from speaking to Malcolm McPherson, the hope is that what Mackay can do with the club in terms of improving it on the field will sort of draw focus away from from his past. I think they're not, like I say, they're not seeking to brush it under the carpet. They're aware of it. They're aware of the reaction. But I think they're hoping that what he can do on the pitch will sort of take the focus away a little bit. I don't know. I don't think that'll be enough for every fan. I think there's some fans who might think. I mean, I've seen some supporters doing this. They've listened to Mackay speaking on podcasts, and they basically said that having listened to him in footballing terms, they can see why he's been brought in. And I think it just seems, I've been at the risk of repeating myself, it just seems like that is the sort of hope at the moment, or the belief in in what McPherson's been saying, is that Mackay is the right man to kind of turn things around for Hibs on the pitch.
Yeah, as you were kind of alluding to there, I'm not convinced that it will be enough to win round kind of everybody who has sort of come out against this decision. I think I'm not going to sit here and tell anybody how they should feel about it, or how they should react to it. I've tried to sort of take in as much opinion on it as possible. Really, just kind of listen, as you say. I've listened to a few podcasts. I've looked at what fans are saying on social media, and there has been a sort of real breadth of reaction from folk who are saying, well, I've got no issue. For me, it's all about what he can bring in a football sense. I've seen people saying, I don't agree with what he said and did in the past. Don't condone that at all. And obviously, some of it was really bad, but they are willing to give him a chance. And then it goes all the way to people who are, basically saying, this is not for me. And I just don't. I kind of. I've got sympathy across the board here for supporters, because it's not really a kind of position you want to be put in. I think at times, as a football fan, you kind of. I think I wrote something about this and it's a different subject matter a few years ago in a sort of a previous life almost. I think it was maybe around the subject of sort of dodgy state ownership in football clubs. It's obviously this is different context, different circumstances, but the sort of overall point was the same. It's just it's difficult, and you've got a lot of sympathy for football fans when the decisions taken at their club end up maybe putting them in a sort of giving them a sort of moral question as to what they what they can really get behind. I mean, because football is obviously it's folk go to work all week. It's supposed to be a bit of escapism. The last thing you want when you go to support your team on a Saturday is to like your moral compass in your pocket going haywire. Do you know what I mean? It's like you kind of have sympathy across the board, and obviously I don't have all the answers to this really, so I'm not going to tell anybody how they should feel about it, and I'm sure you're the same as well. But I think at least what we've with the interview with Malcolm, what we've at least tried to do is tried to get some answers from folk at the club as to what their rationale behind it is, and what they feel is the best thing going forward, why they took the decision, what they think Malky can bring in a football sense. Because I think if you're going to look at it purely from that, purely in a footballing sense, he is a guy who has vast experience Scottish football. He's got a huge contacts book. He's done similar-ish. I must admit, I'm not completely clued up on what exactly his role was at the SFA. I should probably read into that a bit more. But he's worked across a breadth of different roles within football, Scottish football, English football. So he brings a wealth of experience. And I think, listening to people over the past while, maybe some sort of real Scottish football expertise is what is maybe been singled out as something that Hibs really sort of require. So I think from a purely footballing sense, then that is the kind of thing that Malky Mackay will bring. You look at his time at Ross County, like obviously I know it ended badly in the end. They almost went down, but you look at some of the players. It was the likes of Regan Charles Cook. He brought in Jan Danda. Was it Harry Clark? Was the guy who played defence? The lad Joseph Hungbo as well. He's had a good sort of success rate in that sense. But as I said, I can. You can understand why folk have got issues with it, and it has been a bit of a divisive one. But I suppose, if we're looking forward, he's probably his first remit, Malky Mackay, is to look at who's going to be the next manager. And it's anybody's guess at this point, is it? I've seen a few shouts, not a huge groundswell of support, but a few people asking, is it the time to give it to David Gray?
Yeah, I don't think he did his chances any harm last night. What I think is interesting is that by having Malky Mackay in that role as kind of sporting director, you can maybe get a bit more leeway to have someone who maybe doesn't have as much experience being an out-and-out manager themselves. I mean, Hibs have kind of made it clear that it's going to be a head coach, it's not going to be a manager. So I think that's sort of going down a very sort of set route. Also, suspiciously similar to the setup that they had not that long ago, which was dismantled and now appears to be getting put back in place piece by piece. But that's maybe another debate for another podcast. But I think it's maybe one of those where it depends on having the sort of right setup. It depends on having the right people in the sort of right positions. And I think you look at the way David Gray handled last night's game, kept it simple, kept a clean sheet, scored 3 goals, could have been more. And, I think possibly, the one thing maybe counting against him is that he hasn't had that sort of extensive experience of, like, for example, Darren McGregor coaching the under-18s or, coaching like a B team somewhere else. And, that's possibly, might count against him. But this is someone who's worked with, he's worked with Jack Ross, he's worked with Sean Maloney, he's worked with Lee Johnson, he's worked with Nick Montgomery. He's played for the club, he's captained the club, he's, scored the odd very significant goal during his time at the club.
When?
I'm not going to list all of them. But, I think he's somebody who gets the club. he knows what it is to to play for the club. He knows the expectations. I think he's very well respected by the players, and I don't just think it's a case of being respected by players like Martin Boyle, Lewis Stevenson, Paul Hanlon, guys who've been there for a long time. I think I think when Dave speaks, you listen as a player.
Yeah.
I think he's just one of those guys who has that kind of gravitas. And when he speaks, when he does media, like, I mean, it's become a bit of a standing joke that somebody always asks about the managerial position or the head coach position, and he always says, I'm not concerned with that. I've been brought in to do a job, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And so it's very. I mean, you've got someone there who's, they're not coming out and saying, yeah, I think Hibs should give the job to me. Privately, he might be thinking that. Privately, he might feel, it's his time. But what I would say is that, he's been with all these managers. He'll have seen, everything they've done, right or wrong, and will use that to sort of influence his own career. And, it's, you can take a risk by appointing somebody from elsewhere. And the Hibs have gone down the route of employing somebody with no connections to the club, who is a well-respected coach but doesn't really have the managerial experience in Sean Maloney. They went tried and tested in, British football by bringing in Lee Johnson, and then they went down the route of up-and-coming manager who's already had success elsewhere. In this case in Australia, Nick Montgomery, and none of them worked out. I mean, obviously there were elements of Johnson's tenure, as we discussed, that were maybe like, for example, meeting targets of getting into, finishing top six, getting into Europe. But then, the cup performances were not great. And I think, Hibs are kind of running out of kind of types of head coach to go for. And I think, they either go for someone like David Gray, or, they go for somebody from overseas. They go for a foreign manager, foreign head coach. I have to think about getting used to that. But, I think in some ways I can understand why people are saying, but David Gray's been part of the coaching staff for these, including Jack Ross, for sort of four managers who, haven't, have basically been sacked. I think possibly more so the sort of the previous three rather than Ross as well, because obviously the 2020-21 season, was good for Hibs. They finished third, did well in the cups, got into Europe.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be the worst idea to give him a shot. I think that, if you're concerned about a lack of experience, then, you've got Malcolm Mackay in there, and there's also the chance, I think, you maybe look to bring in an experienced assistant coach. Something like that, someone for Gray to lean on, who's not going to sort of steal the limelight, but is going to help bring him on, whilst also, providing support. I mean, I think you look at going back to 2016, or well, before then, when Hibs had Alan Stubbs as head coach, and he had sort of John Doolan with them, and Andy Holden as well, and it was just sort of like the three just seemed to work really well together, as a coaching staff, and I don't really see any reason why they couldn't go for something like that again, where you've got someone, maybe like a younger coach like David Gray, supported by one or two more experienced guys who are more than happy to let him sort of forge his own managerial career whilst providing backup. So I think the only possible concern is that, given David Gray's standing amongst fans of Hibernian Football Club and his place in the history of the club, would they want to risk, or would he want to risk even sort of sullying that by not performing well as a head coach? But I think if you're trying to get around that, then that's when you look to bring in people around him to ensure that he's got all the support he needs, and all the all the sort of help, advice, you name it, the sort of proper network. And I think with the appointment of Mackay, it looks like that's what they're trying to do, regardless of who gets the role. So I think the situation is probably more appealing in terms of being able to appoint Gray, if that's what they wanted to do, than it has been previously. And obviously, he's had what's he's in his fourth interim management spell now. I think, I mean, yeah, it's It's an interesting one. It's certainly not one that I would be against from what I've seen. I think it just depends on whether or not Malky Mackay and the board feel that's the direction to go in.
Yep. In the interests of further content, I'm going to stop all new manager chat because I'm sure we'll be back at some point soon with a full episodes that we can devote to that. So before we give too much away on that front, I think we'll maybe just call it there, folks. I think we've covered just about everything from a pretty manic week in the world of Hibernian FC. Thanks for all your comments on Facebook and YouTube. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of them, but we are out of time, unfortunately. But we'll be back.
We'll just have to do a Q&A one sometime.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Keep them coming, and we will devote an entire episode to listener and viewer questions. I'm sure that could keep us going for quite some time. But for now, I just want to thank you all for joining us. I just redirect you before we head off to Patrick's interview with Malcolm McPherson, which expands on pretty much all the topics that we've covered during today's episode. He talks about Ben Kinsell, he talks about Nick Montgomery, Malky Mackay, and just the general direction that he hopes the club is going in. To read that, you will have to subscribe to the Hibs Observer. Details of that are on the ticker below. We're currently running an offer, £4 for 4 months, full access. You just visit hibsobserver.co.uk/subscribe. If you've joined us on YouTube today, please do consider hitting that subscribe button as well to help us keep growing the channel. It keeps us going on that front, and it means we can keep on bringing you these videos across, which I'm sure there's going to be many more to come because it's going to be a pretty busy few weeks and months to come at Easter Road. But yeah, on that note, folks, thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate it, and we will catch you again very soon. Cheers.